Hey everybody, welcome to Geeky Dads. Talk about geeky things. I'm JJ Johnson, and joining me tonight on the show is none other than Clint Hall. Clint, welcome to the show, man.
Bawib grana wheat nini bang. Bawib grana wheat nini bang. Right? Isn't that the universal greeting?
Oh,
Is,
that
is my
top.
is my is my pronunciation off? Is my accent messing it up?
You threw me with that, man, because I sat there and I was like, "Oh my gosh, did he just say that?" I'm like,
Yeah, man.
"Yes."
Yeah, man. I have been waiting for this conversation for 30 years.
All right, so you pitched this conversation that we're going to talk about tonight back on December 13th. I remember this clearly, and it is May. I've waited 5 months for this show, man. That is how long I've been waiting for this show.
Yeah, and I don't know how much you tend to like pull back the curtain on your podcast process, but I was aware of your podcast. I'd listened to a bunch of episodes, and I got like this weird fear that somebody was going to beat me to Transformers the movie from 1986, like as if other people were just couldn't wait to talk about like the death of Optimus Prime and the incomplete hero's journey of Hot Rod and all this other stuff. So yeah, so I proactively reached out to you and I said, "Can I please come on and talk about the 1986 animated Transformers the movie?" And you graciously said yes. So thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here. I have a hard time finding people that will talk with me about about this movie. So this is really, really exciting. This is a big moment for me.
All right, man. Well, I'm excited to have you on. Before we get started, you actually have a new book coming out sometime at the end of this year, and you're doing a cover reveal right now while during this week actually that this episode is dropping. So why don't you tell everybody about your book and where they can go check out this cover at?
Yes. So the book, I got to get good at this. This is actually my first time like on a podcast, like pitching it now that it's kind of available for pre-order. Yes, the book is called Steal Fire from the Gods. It is being published by Enclave Publishing / Oasis Family Media. The book is set in a world in which AI has discovered the secrets of elemental magic and used that power to overthrow humanity. Our story follows 22-year-old Gunnar Graves, who has lost all faith in God and humanity when his entire unit was destroyed. He now lives in a machine controlled village, and he spends most of his days trying to create fire magic on his own so that he can take his revenge. But his power doesn't ignite until the worst possible time. So the story follows him on the run. He is lost in a mad world with the machines hunting him and crazy cyborg clans and dark dark power users and all this kind of stuff as he is trying to understand this deeper life-based magic that has sort of found him and these people who use it that have also found him. And of course, if he can't understand how to use this power and trust the power inside of him, then the fate of the world it rests upon his ability to do so. So I need to sharpen this pitch a little bit. But the book is available for pre-order now. You can go to if you go to clinthall.com/links. I'll put up a link where you can pre-order the hardcover. The hardcover is available now for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere where you would pre-order books. If you're more into ebooks or audiobooks, that's coming as well, but the pre-order probably isn't live just yet, but that is coming. So the easiest thing to do is just to go follow me on Instagram at Clint Hall, and I'll always post all the updates there in addition to a whole bunch of other fun stuff.
Excellent. We will put all those links in the show notes. Now, real quick before we move on, you also have a podcast yourself. So why don't you tell everybody about your podcast, man?
Yeah, so my joke too, and you're totally unaware of this. This is one of those things that's probably funny to only me, but I had Andrew Swearingen. I had him on and I asked him this, and I still don't remember what the right way to pronounce his name was. And you know what? Don't unmute to tell me. I'm just gonna say it wrong. Um, but I told him that that he was on my rival podcast, which was this one. So I don't know if you were aware, but you and I are podcast rivals, which I thought was funny because I'm like, I don't even think JJ knows I have a podcast. But so I declared the Geeky Dads podcast my rival. But no, the name of my podcast is The Experience: Conversations with Creatives. And it is just that. I just have on creative people that I think are interesting. I've had on musicians, directors, obviously a ton of writers, artists, illustrators from HBO, Marvel, HarperCollins, Sports Illustrated, and I've got some exciting guests coming up as well, including Kirk DuPont, who designed my cover, which by the time this podcast goes up will now be available. So you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts, and then again, it is The Experience: Conversations with Creatives.
Excellent. And it is a great podcast. I've listened to it. And Kirk DuPont has done a lot of covers for various authors that we've had on this show,
He's
including
amazing.
John Oddie. So he
Yeah.
is absolutely amazing. You will love his covers. Oh, okay, man. Let's get into this. We're talking tonight the Transformers movie from 1986, or some of us Gen Xers like to call it the Great Massacre of 1986.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
This movie. Okay, this is my opinion, and I'll let you get into it. So this movie does a lot of great things because G.I. Joe Transformers, in my opinion, they understood what it means to do storytelling for boys in phenomenal ways.
Sure.
Now, the pacing of this film, the story structure of this film, it was action sequence, action sequence, action sequence. That's how they did it back then. And it's good. So in some ways, it was perfect. But in other ways,
Yeah.
it was a disaster. But I think in good ways sometimes. So what are your initial opinions about this 1986? I was 9 years old when this came out. I saw this in theaters, and I remember leaving the theater just thinking, what just happened? And so what is your initial thoughts, man?
And one of the questions that I was going to ask you was whether you remembered the first time that you saw it. I'm a little bit younger than you, but not much. But I don't remember the first time I saw this movie. This is one of those movies that we had and was always just kind of around. And I don't remember sort of the first time that I sat down and watched it. But it did have a very profound impact on me. And I have spent a lot of time. So obviously, we're both authors. And I wonder how much you do this. Do you ever, I know I'm already getting off topic, and I promise I'm going to come back to this. Do you ever ask yourself, okay, I know I liked this, but why? Why do I like this? What is it about this that really speaks to me? Okay.
All the time. I do that all the time. And there's certain things that I enjoy that other people don't enjoy. And I'm like, okay, what is it about this? For example, and we're not getting off topic. We can go 100 different directions for all I care. I love the TV show Jericho, the post-apocalyptic TV show Jericho. I will rewatch that every single year. I do not understand why I like it. And I have sat down and I have studied the characters, the structure of that show, the everything about that show. And other people are just like, well, it got canceled after, 2 seasons. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's awesome. You just got to get through the first episode,
Right.
You don't understand it. And I've done that with several things like G.I. Joe. I've done that with like this movie, Transformers. I've done it with a lot of different things. It's tough to really nail down why certain things appeal to you when they don't necessarily always appeal to others. So yeah, I do that.
Really, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm muted for a second.
You're good.
I don't know if I've necessarily solved the issue of why I like this movie so much. But I heard Neil Gaiman say one time he had seen something as a kid. I think it was a Doctor Who episode, and it was really scary. And he remembers being a little kid hiding behind the couch because he couldn't look at the screen because it was so scary. And he said that he had never gone back and watched that episode again because he didn't want to lose that fear, because that was kind of part of the magic of that episode for him. And what it made me think about is strong emotional impacts of stories when we're children and how that can affect us for a very long time. Now, I've watched this movie, dozens of times at least. But I can't help but wonder if part of the reason why this movie has had such an impact on me is the death of Optimus Prime and how striking it was, how surprising it was. Well, specifically Optimus Prime, but not only Optimus Prime, because these were cartoons that we were familiar with, and we're seeing characters be killed pretty brutally. I mean, acting in ways that we didn't normally see, and this was very genre breaking in that way. And I know it feels silly to talk about that when we're talking about a movie that was certainly produced to sell toys, but that is really what it did. And they did it. And what's funny is they broke the genre because they wanted to sell toys, because the idea was we're going to kill off all of your existing toys that you love so that you have to buy all these new toys because Optimus Prime and Cliff Jumper and whoever else, they're all dead now. And now you got to buy Hot Rod and Cup and whatever. And it made me think about is that why? Is that why this has made such an impact on me? Because as a kid, it gave me such strong emotional reactions. Like I don't remember if I was crying about it or anything. But the Optimus Prime death scene is powerful. And this is, even though this is a mess, and the truth is, I actually don't want to talk too much about why it's a mess, because there's plenty of people who have done that, and you can find that stuff. Although I do want to ask you your favorite disaster of this movie, or your favorite thing that doesn't make sense, because I've got a favorite. Um, but there are a lot of things in this movie that are done very, very powerfully, and I think those moments, disconnected as they may be, are why this movie has really stuck with me for a really long time.
I agree with what you're saying there about movies that, like, my wife can't watch ET, and she doesn't want our kids to watch ET, partly because of the scene with them, ET and Elliot in the hospital. So I think there's a lot to be said here about that. I mean, let's just run down a list real quick. So you had Braun. I made a list. This is how bad it is.
Oh, the hit
Braun,
list.
yes, Braun, Ironhide, Ratchet, Windcharger, Wheeljack, and not just them. I mean, we're going to talk about Optimus Prime here in a minute, but even the Decepticons,
Oh yeah,
they're toast
yeah.
because the entire premise of this movie is about. I almost said Omnicron. It's Unicron.
I can't tell you how many times I typed unicorn when I was making notes for this.
Yes. So Unicron is basically, this. It's like a live Death Star, is the best way to put it.
Mixed with
And
Galactus, basically.
right.
That's basically what it is.
And
Yep.
he destroys Moonbase 1, Moonbase 2, and he's basically everybody's dying. And in the first act, up into Optimus's death, we had so many deaths of so many characters, but the first 2 years of the cartoon, we didn't have any of those deaths.
Right.
And then you're sitting there looking at it, you're like, wait, what? What are they doing? And then and Optimus dies before the first act. It ends. That's the end of the first act, and it becomes Hot Rod's story from there. He becomes pretty much, the hero of the story, and it's a redemption story. And they did set that up very well, I thought, for Hot Rod. But as far as things that don't make sense, okay, this is the one that got me the most.
Okay.
They're on the junk planet.
We might have the same one.
And you have these weird looking, I don't know what they are, but they had the mustaches and stuff like that.
Didn't they just call them the Junkticons?
I think
Or something
so,
like that?
because you
Okay.
had the Sharkticons, you had the Dinobots, you had Hot Rod and Cup, who is a character in and of himself. They're over here on the Sharkicon type planet, and then there's the Junk planet and the Junkicons, and that scene right there with them where they'd start, like, they do the universal greeting that you did to me, and they start dancing all of a sudden and
Yep.
like throwing this party, and I'm just sitting there going, and I rewatched it this weekend. I had actually forgot about that scene,
Mhm.
but I'm sitting there going, what in the world
It's so
is
random.
going on?
Yeah. My so yeah, my favorite thing about this movie that doesn't make, and again, I don't want to nitpick this movie, but this one I kind of like love slash hate sort of. So Optimus Prime gets shot by Megatron a couple times in the stomach, basically after a fight, and still alive. They take him to, I guess, the Autobot infirmary. He's surrounded by Autobot technology, surrounded by people who could help, conceivably, and still passes away from the wounds he has sustained in this battle. Okay. Few shots to the stomach. Later, Ultra Magnus is absolutely blown to pieces. And these junk transformers are like, no big deal. They just kind of simply, they literally, like on the junk planet, just on the junk planet, just like on the ground, they just kind of push all of his pieces back together, polish him up a little bit, and he's fine. He's back. He's good. Ultra Magnus, he's like, you're all alive, and I'm alive. And that just, I was like, really? Wow, Optimus couldn't bounce back from a couple of gut shots, but Ultra Magnus literally gets blown to smithereens. But yeah, he's fine. So I'm like, if Optimus had died on the junk planet, would he have been okay? Anyways, um, I did I wrote down some questions for you too. And another one though that I kind of, while we're on the topic, is this the first time that you remember seeing characters that you knew dying on screen?
Characters that were with me, like
Yeah.
in that way. Obviously, I'd seen ET before this,
Right.
but nobody died in ET.
Right.
At the end of the day, nobody died in ET. This is one of the first films as a little kid where a character that I absolutely loved. I had all the toys.
Yep.
First time I recall, one of them actually died, and honestly, as a kid, I didn't really know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
I remember going home and I'm just like, me and my friends, we would, I was probably in the third grade, maybe fourth grade, getting ready to go into fourth grade, and we would talk about it and just be like, I don't want to watch the new show. I don't like any of the new
Yeah.
Autobots. And there was a ton of backlash
There
over
was.
Optimus dying.
Yep.
I mean, I've heard interviews. I think there's a documentary out there that actually talks about this, and they got reports that one kid like wouldn't come out of his room for nearly 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Other than just the like eat and go to the bathroom and stuff
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
And it traumatized. They actually had to bring Optimus Prime back in
Yep.
the next season. At the end of the next season, that's how controversial it was. And what's weird is we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have social media. I
Right.
can't imagine, had we had that stuff back then, what the outcry would have been, because it was all word of mouth and parents pretty much writing letters complaining about this. So, but yeah, it is one of the first films I remember where a beloved character that I absolutely loved. I mean, I guess you could say Yoda, but that's it was different with Yoda. I guess you could say.
That's different because he wasn't killed.
Right.
He dies and becomes one with the Force. Yeah. This made me think of, when I was thinking about it this week, I actually found myself thinking a little bit about The Watchmen. And I don't know if you've ever read The Watchmen, the graphic novel. Okay, yeah. And in that, The Watchmen, and the truth is, The Watchmen is a brilliant graphic novel. I'm actually not a huge fan of it. I thought it was okay, but I kind of appreciate what it did, which it really changed the way that people thought about comic books, because that was one of the first. And originally, Alan Moore wanted to use known superheroes, but having them, engage in, we'll say, adult relationships and having adult problems and dying and that sort of thing. And he really wanted to change the way that people thought about comic books, and he certainly did. And The Watchmen certainly achieved that. And this made me kind of think of that in terms of doing things that we wouldn't have thought you could do in the creative space that you were working in. You mentioned, you mentioned, I got so many ways I want to go with this, because, you mentioned G.I. Joe. They were going to do the same thing in the G.I. Joe movie. They were going to kill Duke. And there was such a backlash to the Transformers movies that they walked it back a little bit, and they just put him in a coma. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, I do remember that one.
Yeah.
And but yeah, you're absolutely right. They walked it back, and rumor got out that they were planning to do it, but
Hmm.
there was such an outcry over this one that they had to end up walking it back. Yeah.
What's interesting too, listening to a I was listening to a podcast with Robert Kirkman, and he was actually talking about Transformers the movie, and it was interesting because even though he was like joking about it, you could also tell that he actually really loves this movie. But and he did say, and he said it joking, but joking in a way that I don't think he was fully joking. He talked about The Walking Dead and how a lot of his choices are actually influenced by this movie. In that, and the thing about The Walking Dead was that nobody was safe. Anybody except Daryl, anybody could die at any time. And he said that he honestly kind of felt like that came from being a kid and watching the Transformers movie, and the shock of that, the shock of realizing that like you've always been taught that these characters are going to be safe, and suddenly they're not safe anymore. I thought that that was really interesting. The cultural impact of this movie, and it sounds so silly to say that, but I think that the cultural impact of this movie is way more far-reaching than we think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it had a profound impact on uh, Ron Friedman, who was the screenwriter for
Yep.
this. He was actually the screenwriter on both GI Joe and this.
Yep.
And I got a quote here, and I love this quote because he says, I he basically told them this was a bad
Don't do
idea.
it. Don't do it. Yeah, don't
He
do
said,
it.
this is stupid, and they didn't listen.
Yeah.
And because he realized that in the Autobot family that Prime was a heroic father figure
Right.
in many ways. And he basically said this. He says, I recognize the need to assign a family identities to characters in order to create the recognition factor that young people needed. He says, they can't verbalize this. He says, it's beneath the surface. To remove Optimus Prime, to physically remove Daddy from the family, that wasn't going to work. And he said, I told Hasbro this, and they're lieutenants. And I love the fact that he says they're lieutenants.
Lieutenants.
Yeah. He says, but I told them they would have to bring him back, but they said no, they had great things planned. And then he goes on to say, in other words, they were going to create new, more expensive toys. This had such a profound impact on him that in 2019, he released his memoir. And his memoir is titled, I Killed Optimus Prime.
Have you read it?
No, I saw it on Kindle Unlimited today because I didn't know that he had actually published it. I had heard rumors that he was going to do this, so I have Kindle Unlimited, so it is in my on my Kindle right now.
I went and found a podcast interview that he did with Gilbert Gottfried, hoping that they would at some point talk about this movie. They didn't. So Ron Friedman is like a storied TV writer, like has all these stories about everybody from kind of back in the day in Hollywood, and that's mostly what they talked about. But yeah, I'm gonna have to go read that book. Um, so you mentioned Optimus Prime too. Something that was because I know when we sort of talked in advance of this episode, we also talked about the story structure. In this, I'm obsessed with the monomyth, right, or the hero's journey, sort of as people would say, sort of as observed by Joseph Campbell, right? He certainly didn't invent it, but this is something that he observed. Death of the Mentor is obviously a huge piece of the hero's journey. And what's interesting about what this movie is able to do is that it's able to get the emotional impact of the death of the mentor without really having to do a lot of setup because they understand that the audience is already coming in viewing Optimus Prime the way, like you said, like Ron Friedman said, as a father figure, because this is really Hot Rod's story. But and we know that Optimus Prime is sort of a mentor to all of the Autobots, but we don't see any interaction at all until like the moment of his death between Optimus Prime and Hot Rod. Really, as far as Hot Rod's mentor, it's more Cup in terms of throughout the movie, and that's obviously why they introduced that character the way that they did, and I think they did so very well. But I thought that it was interesting when you do have this pre-existing property, how you are able to shorthand some of those types of things. Again, like and Death of the Mentor was obviously the easiest one.
Yeah, and Hot Rod, um, basically in a way, I mean, he tries to save. So Hot Rod or
Okay,
Optimus and
we're gonna get into
Megatron.
this.
So
Did he
Hot
make the
Rod
right
and
decision?
you know, it's tough because if
It's
I'm
tough,
Hot
right?
Rod, if I'm Hot Rod and I'm looking at Optimus about to get killed by Megatron, I'm gonna come to his aid.
Right.
And I
There's a hidden
know that
gun.
right, and I know
Yeah.
that at the very beginning they were calling him reckless, and yeah, he was. He was kind of a wild child, I guess you could say. But Optimus was. It's no different than Luke wanting to save Obi-Wan. It's no different than
Right.
Frodo upset about Gandalf. Going face to face with the Balrog. I mean, it's no different. And so, is it the right choice? Yeah, because he went in there to try and face off against him. However, it caused Optimus to hesitate in getting the kill shot,
Yeah.
and Megatron took it. But Megatron didn't turn out any better because who was it? Starscream, who by the way is voiced by the same guy as Cobra Commander,
Yeah.
and you know, phenomenal. I'm drawing the name. It's Christopher something. But anyway, he ends up floating Megatron later. So you're kind of like, oh, Megatron got what was coming to him, but then you learn a little bit more about Megatron here in a bit. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's tough not to fault. It's tough to fault Hot Rod, I think.
You know, and again, I do give Hasbro some credit, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I just want to make sure this was mentioned because I thought it was really interesting. I don't know if you knew this, but before the toy line was originally launched, did you know that Hasbro hired Marvel Comics to write the backstory of the Transformers? This is before the movie, before anything. I had never heard that before. Now, I knew that Marvel did eventually make comics of the Transformers, but I didn't know that before they launched the toy line, they had. And what's funny is it actually bounced around between a couple different writers at Marvel that they were going to. That they were going to, create this whole backstory just for a toy line. That seemed I wouldn't have expected them to do that. I would have expected them to just crank out some cool toys and just expect kids to buy them, and then maybe they'll slap on a narrative later. But I don't know. Did you know about that?
I found out about it years later. Obviously, at the time, I didn't know anything about it, but I found out about it about the time I remember Marvel putting out a new superhero line,
Hmm.
and I think it was Secret Wars. I could be totally wrong on that. They put out a basically just this toy line, and then wrote a comic line to go with it. So I knew that Hasbro was looking at different things like that, and but I didn't find it out until years later, and I think it was when I was kind of going back to this movie years and years later. I think it was back when there was a documentary put out about this movie, and I cannot remember the title of it, but I think it was around that time that I started kind of remembering this stuff and getting back into uh, looking at this film. But yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, to think about it, that Marvel, but at the same time, Friedman and Stan Lee were really good friends too,
Yep. Yep.
and so it kind of makes sense. So
Yeah. And the thing, and again, it feels silly talking about it this way, but if you ever dig into a lot of the mythology behind Transformers, a lot of the work that's been done, the writing that's been done now, it's branched off in several different directions. That whoever is sort of the keeper of the canon, which I assume is still Hasbro, they don't keep it with a tight leash for sure. There's a lot of sort of discrepancies in the canon, but there's some really great writing in terms of where the Transformers came from and the backstory. And we'll get into Unicron later, but it's actually really, really interesting. Like, what does it mean to be a prime? And what is Cybertron and all of that kind of stuff? There's been some really rich and exceptional work done in the world building and mythology of Transformers that you wouldn't, that I guess and maybe this is just me being cynical about toys, but that I wouldn't have expected. But as I've looked into it over the years, and I've never really read the comics that much, but I've read like the Wikipedias and the wikis from the fans and that sort of thing, and it's great. It's really great and interesting stuff that they've done. Um, I want to get, and I don't mean to like take the reins here because my inner podcast host is coming out. So stop me if I'm going the wrong way. I want to get back to the death of Optimus Prime because this is something, and I'm sure you have a lot of writers that listen to this podcast because a lot of our friends are writers. And that death scene is done exceptionally well. And something that I noticed for the first time recently when obviously I rewatched it like basically one and a half times in preparation to come on this podcast is that we get contrasting emotions in that scene that build on each other. So we know that it's not good when when they come on that scene and we see Optimus Prime laying there and she's got basically an EKG and he's super weak and it's really 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 sad. And the music, and we'll talk about the music later. The music is incredible. The music is cueing us to be sad. It's extremely well done. Vince DiCola, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and if I'm not, I apologize. The music is telling us how sad we need to be. But when he brings out the matrix of leadership to pass it on, the music lifts and it becomes a beautiful, wondrous moment. There is the brilliant choice for in his weakness him to drop it as he's trying to hand it to Ultra Magnus. And of course, Hot Rod is the one to catch it. And we get this sparkling moment, this shining moment where we understand who the true hero of the story is. But Hot Rod still does the right thing and hands it to Ultra Magnus. And we see kind of the beauty that's behind all of this and the heroism behind the Autobots. And then as soon as Ultra Magnus, kind of puts the Matrix in his chest and kind of closes up, the music drops again. And then, I mean, it gets super dark, super fast. And then when Optimus dies, his body goes gray, and a brilliant slash heart wrenching touch, especially for a kids movie, is the way his head falls to the side. Um, and I had talked to today. I talked to David Farland one time about how do you create wonder in a story, and he used the Lord of the Rings as an example. And he said, the thing about the Lord of the Rings is there's a lot of walking. There's a lot of just them walking. And because a lot of that stuff is long, and I don't mean to be sacrilege, kind of boring, it makes the scenes of wonder that much more powerful because you have that contrast because it's building up to them. And I've seen like horror movies do this kind of thing where you'll have something really funny followed by something really scary. Because when you have those contrasting emotions next to each other, they make each other stronger, especially the one that follows. And I thought about that in that scene. I was like, this, because they were smart enough to put that bit of wonder in the middle that lifts up your emotions for a second, it makes that death so much more astounding and powerful. Um, and it's just something that I think really sticks with you. And I know this script in this story went through a lot of drafts and a lot of rewrites and iterations and such as most movies do. But I got to think that that's a scene that got left alone because it is really good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, I to me it was one I rewound it this Sunday night because I watched this Sunday night and then I rewatched it a little bit uh yesterday. And that scene, I feel like putting it right there within the first 20 minutes. All right.
Yeah.
And it's like you were saying, there's a lot of walking in the Lord of the Rings, and it makes
Hmm.
the scenes of sense of wonder much more powerful. In horror movies, I'm a big horror movie buff, and this is what I think Scream, the original one, did really well. A lot of
I love that movie so much.
making fun of horror movies, and then
Yes.
following it up with elements of just terror.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this does. You have all these action sequences taking place. You have all of a sudden wait a minute, Optimus is dying. And it's like you said, the music in this film,
Brilliant.
all the way around, all the rock songs that you're getting. I mean, it is 80s all the way. And then all of a sudden, you just get that moment where it slows, it just literally slows down right there.
Yes.
Because it's just the pacing of this film is just boom, 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 one thing after another, and then you stop and you zero in and you're like, this is an important moment. And
Yep.
it's not only an important moment for because Optimus is dying, but it's the torch is being passed and it's got to go on. The story's got to go on.
Right.
And like I said, I know they got a lot of pushback and backlash because of the great massacre that happened in that first act.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things that here we are nearly almost 40 years later still talking about.
And it's important for the hero. It's important for Hot Rod. The other scene that this made me think about was Moana, which we've watched several times with our kids. Our boys love that movie, and that movie's beautiful and brilliant. The music is incredible, and but so in Moana, it is she's having a fight with her dad because she wants to be an adventurer, basically, and he's trying to stop her because he's afraid because of something that's happened to him in the past. But so it's like a tension, and then that is immediately broken by someone running up and basically saying, "Your mother," and then for Moana, "Your grandmother," she's about to die. And then there's a really sad but touching scene there. But then that's immediately followed by Moana running out to the water, and you see spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen Moana. Go see Moana if you haven't. Um, you see like her grandmother's spirit literally sweeping over the trees and then into the water, and she becomes like a magic like manta ray or stingray or something. Um, and it's amazing, and the music swells because Lin-Manuel Miranda is a genius, and the emotion there is so powerful that the emotion there is so powerful that you're now with this hero on this journey, and you kind of feel like you've experienced the thing that they've just experienced. So, and for us here, right, it's Hot Rod, and we know by this point that obviously it's Hot Rod. If it wasn't clear before, it's clear now. They've done everything with him though. They've done, and again, I'm a big like, I want to spot all the landmarks. So he's saved the cat, right? Because he saves Max a couple times in the opening scene. Uh, and then he's somewhat responsible for the death of the mentor. And then when he catches the Matrix, if it wasn't obvious before, it's obvious now. He's also the coolest character, and so usually the coolest characters with text. Before I know we're going to get on Hot Rod, and I'm ready to get on Hot Rod. One interesting thing though that I was also thinking about with Optimus Prime is that you almost had to kill Optimus Prime in some ways. Here's what I'm trying to say. Optimus Prime, as Optimus Prime, can never really be the protagonist because there's nowhere for him to go. It's the Superman problem in a lot of ways, in that he's already about as powerful as he's going to be, and he's already morally perfect. And I'm not trying to bash on Superman. I'm sure there's Superman fans listening. But the best Superman stories tend to be the ones where he either loses his powers or he like turns evil for for some reason, or loses control of his mind. And I heard someone really smart once say that the best Superman stories aren't really about Superman; they're actually about the people around Superman. And I get that, right, because they're the people who have to learn and change and grow and that sort of thing. And I do think that that's sort of a problem that Optimus Prime can present in a movie like this, because there's no change to be done. Uh, now if you were going to make Optimus the protagonist, you would have to go back to the origin, and I got real deep. So his original, before he was Optimus Prime, he was Orion Pax. Before he went and like seized basically the Matrix as it's like this heroic act and became Optimus Prime. But Yeah, I don't know. I'm talking a lot, JJ. Jump in here. Jump in here and save me.
Well, yeah, I do want to get on a hot rod, but going back real quick, and there's a guy in my Facebook group. I have a Geeky Dad's Geeky Things Facebook group. His name is Michael Garrigan. I can't say his last name. He is like a massive uh, Transformer fan and has a big collection. I think he's even sent me pictures and stuff like this. So I think he knows a little bit about the history. But going back on the backstory of real quick, Optimus, I think he was one of 13 of the original Primes, if I'm not mistaken. I could be totally off the base on that. And
I don't I don't think he was. I think Sentinel Prime was, and I
okay,
think
so
Sentinel Prime might have been the one that basically said this guy's next,
okay,
essentially. But don't quote me on that. I might be not a because they're conflicting. When I was
yeah,
researching this, I saw a lot of different, you know,
yeah, and and I, it's interesting because I didn't know a lot of that history. And I think a lot of that was probably developed by Marvel for the toy line more than anything.
right.
Um, so it's kind of interesting. I know what they're wanting to do with this toy line. They're wanting to create a whole new generation, but the
Yeah.
problem is the generation that was playing with them wasn't done playing with them.
Right.
And it's like if you wanted to create a new generation, you should have waited till 1993 or 96 or something like that, because we were all off in high school, watching pro wrestling and stuff like that at that time. But it's interesting getting into hot rod. Yeah, I do want to get into hot rod now because hot rod was a character who ended up taking the Matrix right there at the end. Even though, going back to what you were saying earlier, that Ultra Magnus was basically put back together in a
Yeah.
way on the jump.
That's true.
It's like, okay, wait a minute.
You've had your chance.
Yeah. So what? He failed, and
I never thought about this.
there's not a two-strike policy. It's just one strike, you're out. And now all of a sudden, Hot Rod and who Hot Rod ended up becoming
Rodimus Prime.
Yeah, yeah. So that always struck me as odd because he's still over here alive. The Junkers put him back together. So
So do you think he's like the day after this movie, he's kind of standing there being like, "Hey, you done with the Matrix? Because really, Optimus gave it to me."
Exactly. It's like, I was the chosen one and I failed. And that's really what that is. It's like, he was the chosen one by Prime, but he remember, he didn't want it either.
Yeah.
So
Which is important. You're not supposed to want it.
right.
Okay, so I'm going to get to Hot Rod. I'm going to Optimus for a second, but I'm going to come back to Hot Rod because we have this moment with Optimus. Actually, we have two quotes from Optimus in this battle. Megatron must be stopped no matter the cost, and it's ominous the way that he says it. And then when he actually is face to face with Megatron, he says, "One shall stand, one shall fall." Now, this is me I'm reaching too far here, but when I was looking at Unicron, I was researching kind of the backstory of Unicron. One of the things about Unicron is that Unicron is able to map galaxies through like statistical probabilities that to sort of know what is the most likely thing to happen and to have happened. And he's able to map galaxies that way by taking in data and being like, okay, well, it's basically saying this must be here, even though I haven't been there, because statistically it's the most probable thing. If that functionality exists at all in the Autobots, that sort of having some kind of a knowledge of what's going to happen, and maybe this would be something that would be more specifically for a Prime because they are so much more powerful. They carry the spark of Primus. Man, dude, I am a super nerd. The spark of Primus, who is basically like the Transformer god and Unicron's brother, because he carries that inside of him. The point that I'm trying to get at is, does Optimus know at the beginning? And I'm actually, before I keep going, I want to ask you this question. Do you think that Optimus knows that either he or Megatron is going to die?
Oh, how many battles have they had up until this point, though? And
A
so
lot, right?
I know, but it feels just based off of the things that he's saying,
Yes.
it feels that he knows
Right.
that one of them is done right here.
Right. Right.
Now, in a sense, I mean, obviously, Megatron is saved by Unicron, who turns him into Galvatron. I know,
Right.
folks, it gets confusing, but um, I obviously, I don't think that Optimus ever believed that he was going to be the one to fall. But I think in that moment he knew that this was that battle.
So the reason why I ask that is I can't help but wonder. Maybe this is me being a little bit sort of like naive, optimistic dreamer. If because like you said, Ultra Magnus is essentially the chosen one, chosen by Optimus. It makes me wonder though if Optimus knows that it's actually Hot Rod, but not yet, right? That this hero still has something that he needs to do, that he needs to go through. Which, by the way, this is kind of my biggest flaw with the movie, and I because Ron Friedman is such an experienced screenwriter, I have to wonder if this is something that's on the cutting room floor, so to speak. Because the one thing that we do not have in Hot Rod's hero's journey is we don't really have that moment where he sort of recognizes and addresses his flaw, which we're basically told is supposed to be that he's reckless, right? But for the rest of there's no moment of sort of like inner truth for him necessarily where he makes this, so he sees this that needs to be changed in himself and makes that change. And it's probably, I wonder if it's something that was there, but it's something that they just cut for time because I like it's a kid's movie. But really, for the rest of the movie, he's kind of just he's pretty heroic, but still reckless. Like let's just go for it. Like with the Sharktacons, he's like, you know what? Let's just go right at him, and if we die, we'll die fighting, and then it works out for him. And then when they attack Unicron, he's like, let's just drive this spaceship straight into his eye, and that works out for him. We are missing in hot, or do you think I'm wrong? And if you think I'm wrong, tell me. I feel
No,
like we are missing that moment.
I do. I agree because when you look at Hot Rod's journey in the story, okay, so they load up into basically two different ships.
Yeah.
Yeah. One group goes this way, the other group goes this way. Now, Hot Rod and Cup basically have the Dinobots,
Yes.
and they crash land on the
The planet of the Quintessons.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
So obviously they get out, they're captured. Okay, so they end up in a dicey situation. Uh, apparently, innocent gets you executed on this planet, and basically, they can't transform until they're in the water with the sharks.
Right.
And then basically it's just them getting off the planet, but they're not even the ones that get off the planet. It's the Dinobots show up with this little
Save him
teeny tiny thing.
with Wheelie.
Yeah, Wheelie.
Yeah.
And that's how they figure out how to get out, but it's not Hot Rod making the decisions.
Right.
He's still being reckless.
We don't see him learn
However,
anything.
we never see him learn from his flaws.
Yeah.
He basically everything just kind of. I do agree because I feel like everything just kind of fell into place for him
Yeah.
to be able to get the Matrix.
And he does have to fight.
He does have to fight, yes.
He shows courage. But he always had courage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he had courage when he tried to jump in there and take on
Right.
Megatron.
Right.
And, part of his courage is obviously his recklessness, too.
That's a really good point.
I mean,
so was he even wrong? Which we didn't. You and I can't even decide if we think he was wrong.
right.
Trying to save
So
Optimus.
when you think of it from that angle, maybe he was wrong. But
Yeah.
going back to Optimus, I think in a way that Optimus knew that it was going to be Hot Rod, but that Hot Rod wasn't ready. But we never got to that point where Hot Rod addressed
Right.
who he is, and you always get to that point in a hero's journey. It's
Right.
it's it's the classic use the Force Luke, where he turns off his guiding computer. It's that
Right.
moment. We don't get that in in this movie, and that, yes, it is missing. So I do agree with that.
And it should have been probably from Cup, because Cup is annoyed with him at first, and but is sort of with him reluctantly. We respect Cup. We see Cup excel in battle, but we also know that Cup is experienced because he's sharing all of these stories the whole time that he's seen it all. And and again, I just, and this is, I'll never have that. Maybe Ron Friedman put this in his book. I don't know. Um, I can't help but wonder if there was at one point, if there was some kind of a scene where Cup was like, "You got to get it together. There's something about you. You have to mature in a certain way, that you have to change in a certain way." And if it got cut, because obviously this end product wasn't exactly what Ron Friedman would have, would have envisioned. I'd give anything, like, I was like, I wonder if there's like an original script, that he was like, "Hey, this is my Transformers the movie," or something like that. Um, but outside of missing that, though, it does have a lot of great hero's journey moments, including a really, really good inmost cave slash belly of the whale. Uh, that is a very powerful moment when he does, again, perhaps recklessly, but certainly courageously, when he does attack Galvatron and seizes the Matrix, again, and then, achieves his true destiny. Uh, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, he's just doing the exact same thing he did in the first scene, basically just tackling Megatron, now Galvatron, for what he believes is the right thing. Um, but yeah, that was, o outside of missing that piece, like, do you still, though, when you watch it now, does it affect you, though? Like, when you see him, and don't tell me it does if it doesn't. When you see him seize the Matrix, right, and unlock it and become Rodimus Prime, I mean, even though his hero's journey is missing some pieces, for some reason, I still find it effective, and I'm not totally sure why.
I do agree. I think that it is highly effective. Uh, I do think that they probably had some bigger plans, and
Right.
because of the backlash they got, they may have changed those plans. I think that they probably would have addressed those flaws during the next season. Uh, but I do know a lot was cut out of this film because there were a lot of scenes, a number of death scenes that were cut as well,
Right.
and we didn't get those. So, um, I think it is effective. I think it is very good. Like I said, sorry, it is one of those films that still sticks with me.
So when you sent me this structure for, like, hey, here's some of the things that we want to talk about, and I kind of had my ideas too. One of the things you wrote down was just Dinobots. So I'm going to just clear out for a second. I'm going to mute my mic, and I'm just going to let you cook on the Dinobots, because I'm like, I wonder what JJ has to say about the Dinobots. So just go. Just unleash Grimlock.
All right, so Grimlock. All right, first of all, me. He talks in third person the entire time.
Yep.
I love the Dinobots. As a kid, the Dinobots were my jam. I could
Sure.
not wait to get one as far as the toy line was concerned. But in the film, and even in the cartoons, when I heard them speak, they annoyed the heck out of me. Mainly him,
There's a lot of that in this
because
movie.
right, and it's one of those things. Like I said, I can't figure out why. Maybe it's because he's talking about himself in the third person so much. But so many of your favorite story characters have talked about themselves in the third person before.
Yeah.
It's never bothered me. maybe it's because I don't know. He came across as a little arrogant, a little egotistical. I could not identify with the Dinobots. But here's the thing: it's kind of like the Constructicons. You
Hmm.
know, they're at the beginning when oh Starscream basically floats Megatron out the airlock pretty
Yep.
much, and he says, "I'm going to be the new leader." Then all of a sudden, the Constructicons, I'm like, they come into play, but I don't remember them the rest of the film
You're
unless they came
right.
back. I do not remember, and I love the Constructicons growing up, but it's kind of like the Dinobots. I felt like they were just placed in there to just kind of fill a gap in some ways and just to provide some witty dialogue. That was part of what annoyed me about this film was that you get these other elements of whether it's the Decepticons or the Autobots, these things that we love, but they didn't get a significant part of the story. Yeah, I know that on the planet, it was the Dinobots that basically that found that Cup and Hot Rod, but um, I don't know. I did not feel like the Dinobots really got to be a significant part of solving a problem in this film. And like I said, I think it came down to just basically editing out their parts in a way. But that's just my opinion.
Probably. And Hasbro must have recognized how popular they were because they didn't get killed. you know, like the Dinobots got a reprieve, and they're one of the few original characters that gets a reprieve. I'm trying to think. Bumblebee doesn't get killed. He's
Yeah,
barely in the movie.
Yeah,
Well, like two scenes.
yeah. He's got
Um,
like 2 or 3 scenes, but that's like you said. Here's what I think happened. I think they wanted to roll the new toy line out,
yep,
and they wanted to introduce all these new characters,
totally.
and they took the original characters and either killed them off in an unsatisfying way, or they kind of wrote them off to the side to where they really weren't a part of the story
Yeah,
in a way,
yeah.
and they wanted to let the newer characters drive the story. And while it was a great film, and while we cheer Hot Rod, Cup, and all these characters, and we fell in love with them over the years, at the same time we wanted to see our real heroes step in. It's kind of like the reason people had a problem with the Last Jedi. They wanted to see Legends Luke. They didn't get that. They got a different version, and some people didn't like that. And I think that's what you have here is you have a lot of characters that we love because we had the toys,
Hmm.
and we didn't get the story involving them. So it was almost like we got a bait and switch in a way. And go ahead.
It makes me wonder, and this is with the benefit of hindsight, if the better decision might have been instead of killing all of the sort of beloved characters, if you want to sell new toys, you do the same thing with them that you did with a lot of the Decepticons, which is you upgrade them, right? So, like, I remember I was a huge Ninja Turtles kids, and they would release the most ridiculous variations of Ninja Turtles, like turtles surfing and turtles playing baseball and all this stuff. And for some reason, I wanted them as a kid. I wanted all those, and I never was like, okay, well, for this battle, I'm definitely going to get basketball Donatello to come. Like but I still wanted them, and I wonder if, and it's like, again, this was a long time ago. They were still kind of figuring this stuff out. I know, and they were trying to be bold, and I applaud that. But I wonder if instead you probably had to take out Optimus, but you maybe didn't need to have to kill him. But maybe you can just sideline Optimus one way or another. But then instead, what you're doing is maybe you do choose Bumblebee to be a more central figure, but turn him into a cooler car. He gets some kind of upgrade somehow, right? And he becomes a much cooler looking car than he was. And you do that with most of those characters. So now kids still have to buy the new toys, but it's still the characters that you know and love, but it's the new version of them, right? And so you can kind of have your cake and eat it too if you were to take that route. Now this is a very much a rewrite of the story, but I do think that it could have worked, at least from a merchandising perspective, because and this was pre Ninja Turtles, so I guess maybe you didn't know this stuff back then. I don't know how much they did this back then, but kids will definitely buy new variations of the same character um, over and over and over again to have the newest. I don't know. Would you have gone for that? You think?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what they tried to do was they tried to make like Hot Rod the replacement for Bumblebee. But they didn't kill Bumblebee off. I would have much rather seen them do with the Autobots on some of the characters what they did with Megatron and a few of the other
Totally.
Decepticons.
Yeah.
I think it would have went over very well. I think it would have been respected, and I think people would have loved it. I would have definitely. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like this film was such a cultural moment for so many people. And I think a lot of people learned a lot of lessons by watching this film. Like you were saying, Robert Kirkman was talking about The Walking Dead, being influenced somewhat by this movie. And while this movie has a ton of faults, it has so many moments that you look back upon as a kid, or now that you're an adult and you look back upon it, and it's still we're still talking about it right now. And whether it was they upgraded them to a different way, like the dude with the Ninja Turtles, because I know exactly what you're talking about with the Ninja Turtles. um I would have totally dug that. I think that it would have been a much better decision. Obviously this film was affected by toy executives not understanding the culture that they were dealing with and trying to
Yeah.
introduce a new product line in order to make money, and it backfired in a massive way.
Right. And I'm thinking out loud. I think you still could have introduced a new character if you said, the problem with if we try to make Bumblebee the star, the problem is that we've already have all this backstory with Bumblebee, so it'd be difficult to give him a flaw. I do think you could have still introduced a new Autobot uh, to be sort of the central character and perhaps even the heir to Prime or something like that, but handled the rest of it differently. Again, you could still sort of sideline Optimus one or the other. You even could have, well, I don't know if this would have worked. I was even going to say you even could have thrown in something like that he becomes, well, he does say he becomes one with the Matrix, doesn't he? Doesn't he actually say that? Yeah, he does say that. But um, we got to talk about Unicron. And how are we doing on time? Are we okay on time? I have no idea.
Yeah, we're okay on time. Let's talk about
Okay.
Unicron, then we'll wrap it up. But yeah,
Okay.
we definitely got to get into Unicron.
I have one more question that I have to ask you after
Okay.
Unicron, but let's save it for after Unicron. When I reached out to you saying that I wanted to talk about this movie, I had no idea that the next Transformers movie, which I believe releases next month, maybe or in July, I had no idea that Unicron is actually the villain. Did you know that?
Not at the time. I did not find out until probably a couple of months later, because you reached out to me in December. We decided we were going to do it. We were going to wait until May,
Right.
and I think it was February, March. I kind of got. I think it was like a Den of Geek article that was out there. Uh, Kind of revealed that, but I did not know it at the time. And I forgot about it until I was watching this the other night. And I'm like, wait a minute, so yeah, it's kind of I'm kind of interested in what they're going to end up doing here.
Yeah, Unicron is it can be a difficult character, I think, to put on like a live action big screen. Kind of what I'm worried about is I don't like dumping on movies, but when Galactus was in the Fantastic Four movie, one of the ones that we don't really speak of, and they basically just it wasn't really Galactus. It was basically just like a planet devouring thing, but it wasn't nearly as sentient as Galactus. It didn't look like Galactus. Um, and I kind of hope they don't do that with Unicron. The mythology with Unicron again is super deep. So the first two sort of, you wouldn't even really call them Transformers, but the first two sort of beings in this race or whatever ever created were Unicron and Primus. They were created by the One, which is essentially the ultimate god, and they're opposites, right? So and it's much more nuanced than this, but light and dark, chaos and good sort of thing. uh, Primus and Unicron battled many, many, many times. Unicron desires to devour everything and essentially be the center of a galaxy of nothingness, essentially, and is annoyed basically that anything dares to exist. Primus, on the other hand, at some point, after battling for eons with his brother, becomes the planet Cybertron, and it is sort of the spark of Primus. So you could think of Cybertron as like somewhat of a living planet, of a sentient planet, and it is Primus. And this is where the Autobots come from, but also I believe you would also say where the Decepticons come from, and the spark that is in the Matrix of Leadership is Primus. None of this backstory makes it into the movie, and I'm not even sure if this backstory existed when this movie was made, or if they just thought, we'll basically make the Death Star, but then have it turn into a robot. Um, but it's pretty cool stuff, and I gotta say, Unicron works for me as a villain. I think it's pretty cool. I think they played it well. I like the idea that Megatron basically got a mentor as well. Um, in Unicron, it is very much of an Emperor Vader sort of vibe, which then Unicron is sort of the primary antagonist in a lot of ways, and then Megatron is almost sort of like I think the right word would be contagonist, which is sort of like the second in command of the antagonist. But are you a Unicron fan?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I liked about Unicron, especially, and you see this as he's attacking. I mean, it's almost like he's like a giant Pac-Man out there eating these eating planets or spaceships or whatever. I mean, when he attacks Moon Base 1 and then moves over to Moon Base 2, you're just like it's like he's just pulling in not just all the energy, but all the matter that's with it as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, what I liked about it is the reason I liked him better than a villain as a villain, uh, better than Megatron is so cocky that he absolutely thinks at times that he can outsmart or beat Unicron, even though he doesn't realize, even though he will not admit that the entire reason he's still alive and has become Galvatron is because of Unicron.
entirely about Unicron.
He never recognizes that or sees that. He always sees him as a means to basically retain his own power, which, as we learn, he doesn't have any. So I liked it because he was not afraid to put him in his place, even when he thought that he had destroyed the Matrix. He did not realize they had gotten away, and he's constantly reminded of his failure, but he never learned. As a good villain, he never learns from his failure, and you realize that Megatron really isn't all that great of an antagonist when you stack him up against Unicron. He's just
Right.
not. He's pretty weak.
And again, I kind of said that, in a lot of ways you could say that Unicron is sort of a ripoff of the Death Star and Galactus. Unicron is obviously basically a manifestation of death, and of ultimate death, and of ultimate sort of end and nothingness. And that's a cliche, but it's a cliche that works for a reason. I think that even as kids, and this is leading to the question that I'm going to ask you in a minute. Actually, you know what? Here's the deal. I'm actually going to tell you the question I'm going to ask you in a few minutes. I'm going to tell you now so that you can kind of be thinking about it a little bit while I'm blathering on about Unicron. I'm going to ask you if you think it's good for kids to watch movies that have some sad moments like this. So just think about that a little bit. But you know, with Unicron being such an obvious manifestation of just death, ultimate death, it is speaking to something that is primal in humans. Um, that sort of fear of that darkness, of that end, and that nothingness, and not knowing, and that sort of thing. And it's a cliche that always works, and we've seen it in a lot of different forms. So again, Death Star, Galactus, Unicron, but also, I would think about uh, the zombies in The Walking Dead, or any other thing. And I listened to your zombie episode recently, and I like slow zombies personally, because I like that they just keep coming, and I kind of think that's a little bit more terrifying, that the death just keeps coming, that there's really nothing you can do to stop it, unless you're Max Brooks, who figured it out. By the way, everyone go read World War Z; it's brilliant. Um, I would also talk about the White Walkers in Game of Thrones, for people who are Game of Thrones fans, and just that this is just an enemy that only wants to come just destroy everything. And that ultimate type of enemy, that ultimate type of death and destruction. And you and I know, are both believers. We could take this conversation a lot of ways. We don't have time to do it now. But for the writers out there, look, it always works. And you do have to find some original ways and some original spins on it, but it always works, because it's speaking to something that is just hardwired into us.
Yeah, I do agree. And to get onto your question, and I can answer this as somebody who writes middle grade, specifically writes stories for boys who don't like to read.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and my answer may shock a lot of people. Would I ever kill Iggy and Oz? Absolutely not. All right, they're money makers for me. But um, and I did an interview just recently for an Oklahoma book podcast, and one of the things I said, when you're writing like a story for young audiences like this, you have to remember their worldview is very limited. It's their neighborhood, it's their family, it's their school, maybe their sports team, maybe their church. It's very limited. They have very little freedoms. But we also forget that kids deal with a lot. They hear things on the playground. They hear stories from other kids who may have a different lifestyle than they do, a different home environment. There's some kids out there who mom and dad aren't home. And maybe it's not because dad has passed away in a car accident. Maybe it's because dad passed away because of an overdose. Maybe mom is incarcerated. We have a lot of kids out there that deal with a lot of stuff, and kids have to hear these stories of their friends at school who live those type of lives. So they deal with a lot already. And we as adults and parents, we want the best for our kids, so we feel like in many ways we have to protect them. And I do agree. However, I think that our kids also deal with a lot more, especially in public school systems, than we think that they do.
yeah,
And we have to recognize their ability to process these type of things. So do I think it's healthy? Look, my son is 10 years old and he is in love with Godzilla, and he has
hmm
watched Kong versus Godzilla. Hands down, there's death in that story,
yeah,
and he understands that. Now, does he, when Han Solo dies, he just kind of sat there for a second and he's just like, "Oh, okay." You know, I think we underestimate kids' ability to process these things. But here's the deal: they also know it's kind of like they don't have a emotional attachment all the time to every little thing. So like
right,
I had an emotional attachment to Optimus Prime. I'm sitting there going, they just killed Prime. But did I cry over it? No. Did I lock myself in my room for 2 weeks? No. But there
right.
were people who did those type of things. There were people who were upset. So while it's kind of like a double edged sword, because how can I answer this honestly? Because part of me as a
It's
storyteller
hard.
says we got to be careful, but at the same time, as a parent, I also have to recognize that the kids see this stuff and deal with this stuff and talk about this stuff all the time. And am I underestimating my child's ability to process and handle things
Yeah.
emotionally
Yeah.
uh, when I don't think they're ready? So
What, and I say yeah, not because I think you are underestimating it, but you're asking yourself all the same questions that I ask myself. And not only do we maybe underestimate their ability to understand it and deal with it, do they need a little bit of this?
yeah,
Like, do they need to confront some of these difficult things in stories so that they can process it and think about it like in a safe way so that when things happen in real life, they're more equipped? I don't know though. I haven't had to quite get here with so my son just turned 5. So we're not quite there yet. Um, I feel like movies were sadder when we were kids.
yeah.
Land Before Time was brutal. That's the saddest movie I've ever seen.
Oh, Land Before Time. Obviously, there's the famous Bambi.
Oh yeah,
There's
man.
and then you think about Old Yeller, and
Yep.
where the red fern grows, or you think
I was
about
thinking about the Wood Fern Grows. Where the
yeah,
Red Fern Grows. Yeah. Yeah.
and you think about all these films that we grew up with, where they let me put it this way: Transformers 1986, the animation movie, would not be able to make it into theaters today.
Absolutely not.
Not for
No,
kids.
totally.
It would be up there with, looked at as, the Beavis and Butthead movie. You don't take your kids to see it because they kill off everybody.
Right.
I think that I don't want to say we've gotten soft as a world, but I think in a way I don't know, because I think this is where, psychology has kind of pulled us back a little bit, and maybe, you and I turned out fine, but
Debatable.
well, that's debatable. We might need to ask our wives that
Yeah,
question,
right.
but um, there's a lot of people in our generation that obviously didn't. So, but back then we didn't have things like Columbine. We
Yeah,
didn't
right.
have things that had happened in that type of manner yet. So,
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't have a good answer. Um, and I'm going to have to come up with one because it's easier now for my kids to find things than ever. And so I have to think about how much do I guard them versus how much do I let them experience? How much do I need to be there with them? And I'm sure that the real answer is you just have to know your kid and that every kid's probably different. But anyways, I don't have a great answer. I certainly wouldn't criticize anyone's response to this, any parent, I should say, their response to this, because it's a tough question. Like would you let your kid watch something like this? So, yeah. So I hate to end the podcast with an unanswered question, but I do think it's an interesting thing to talk about.
yeah, absolutely, I do. And like I said, folks, if you have not checked out this film and you are a fan of that era, GI Joe, Transformers, all this stuff, um, I invite you to go watch that. Right now, the only place I could find it on any streaming for rent was Apple TV. I think I
Hmm.
rented it for like $3.99. I need to get the DVD. There is a documentary out there. Go read Ron's memoir. It's on my to do list, on my to be read list, along with about 20 other books right now. Um, and like I said, I killed Optimus Prime. What better memoir to write, basically? Because he warned them. He told them this is not going to work. And like all like corporate executives, they didn't listen. So, all right, Clint, and we have beat this thing to death, and I think we could probably go on for another
We
hour.
could. We could. There's still a lot of fruit left on the tree, but that's
Oh,
all right.
absolutely. All right, so everybody go check out Clint's books and his website. Go check out his podcast. I guarantee you're going to enjoy that. I'm a loyal listener. I
And we're
guess
gonna
I'll
get you on there sometime.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come on. I guess we're rival podcasts now, so
Yeah,
I'm willing
bitter,
to accept
bitter
that
rivals.
rivalry.
Optimus and Megatron. I won't
That's
say which
right.
is which.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the day.
That's right.
All right. So, are you going to be at Railmakers this year?
I was gonna say I'll see you at Railmakers.
All
My
right. So,
first time
folks,
in
if you're going to be
years.
in the St. Louis area in July, I believe,
July.
July 12th through the 13th, 14th, and 15th. Go to railmakers.com. You will be able to look under their events, find out where the event is happening. Both Clint and many other podcast guests on this show will be on at Railmakers attending that writers conference. There is a book signing con that Saturday evening. It is huge. I highly recommend it. It's going to be an incredible conference. And folks, I want to thank you all listening. Clint, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. This has been Geeky Dads talk about geeky things, and that's a wrap.